Welcome to Solutions, where listening will leave you inspired by solutions to issues you or others you know may be struggling with in the public education system today. I am Olivia Wall, and I am excited to welcome my guests today, Morgan Davis and Amy Ellerman. Morgan is a K-5 instructional coach in Golden, Colorado. As a coach, she strives to align her practices to the workshop experience, including whole group anchor experiences, small group learning communities, and one-on-one coaching cycles. It is through these parallel practices and her willingness to dive into the work teachers are doing that she learns and coaches best. Morgan's blog, It's About Making Space, encourages her followers to use texts as both sources and mentors by writing about and like them. Amy Ellerman is also an instructional coach in Golden, Colorado. She is passionate about teaching and learning in a workshop model, any content, but if she's being honest, writing workshop will always be her favorite. Exploring authentic and innovative models of professional learning is another area of intense study for Amy. Amy collaborates with teachers and students to grow and support communities of learners of all ages because everyone deserves to feel so invested in their own learning that they find themselves running to school. Amy's blog, aptly named Running to School, encourages her followers to advocate for innovation when it comes to their professional learning experiences. In addition to having their own blogs, both Morgan and Amy are co-authors on the team at Two Writing Teachers blog. Welcome, Morgan and Amy.
Thanks, Olivia. It's nice to be here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to have you both. And I always ask guests to kick off the interview with who an inspiring educator is from their life. Amy, do you want to jump in first?
Sure. I gave this a lot of thought, and I decided that for me, it's Katie Wood Ray. Really early in my teaching career as a first grade teacher, I was part of a book study around her text about the authors. And I just remember it was transformational for me. And I was so in love with her high expectations for the thinking work that our youngest writers can do. I loved the inquiry. I loved her writer to writer stance. I was so just inspired by conferring and feedback and how powerful that was. And I feel like those pieces, along with kind of that learner agency, have been core to my practice as a classroom teacher, but also as a coach.
I love Katie's pieces as well. Morgan, how about you?
I feel like that's cheating because I was also going to say Katie Wood Ray. For the sake of inquiry, we don't have to be experts. Yeah. I'll put another name in the room. I could also say Sam Bennett. I listened to your podcast with her from, I think it was last year or the year before. And she's the person I immediately came home and told my family I want to be her when I grow up. The energy she has for the work of coaching and I would say the high expectations she has for teachers' work set the stage and the foundation for really powerful collaboration. And her idea of parallel practice really named what it is that you mentioned in the bio about whole group learning being about a third of the time we spend with teachers, and then really independent practice and application, which I think is something that I know Amy is really mindful of when she works with teachers and coaching cycles. She's actually become my PLC coach, and I know that about her as a participant in her professional learning as well.
I cannot agree with you more. Sam Bennett is a mentor for me as well. And I had the gift of just being with her a couple of weeks ago. And she's pushing me to triangulate my beliefs with what you would see in my practices and connect that to research to have my back. And I'm working really hard and sending her my drafts for feedback. I think the more we really lay it down, what do we believe to be true about teaching, then we can ensure that our professional learning experiences are crafted to be just that. Your recent posts from the Two Writing Teachers Stronger Together blog series are what compelled me to want both of you as guests. Amy, your post from October 31st, Coaching a la carte, and Morgan's post from November 5th, Teacher Teams, both speak to an issue that I'm bumping up against as a coach myself. Amy, if it's okay, I'm going to quote and use your words. We have noticed a shift in teachers and instructional coaches' capacities for ongoing professional learning. And jumping away from the quote, what I am seeing is for most, the shift is not to engage in more rigorous study. It's to pull back because we are all feeling depleted in a way we have never felt before. Your solutions in both of the blog posts support ongoing professional learning with teacher teams becoming stronger together because, just like the parallel practices, when we meet each other as adult learners where we are, that is exactly what we want for our students. I am thrilled to jump into our conversation. Amy, I'd love for you to kick it off and explain to listeners what coaching a la carte means to you.
For me, coaching a la carte was sort of my attempt to name what I was going through myself as a coach, trying to support teachers and wanting to be doing the kind of coach work that moves learners and that fills teachers and kids up with that positive energy and running against that wall you're talking about where they and I had different levels of capacity for doing that work. And as much as we believed in that work and we knew that work was energy giving, um, people were running on empty and we're really struggling and we're in crisis. And deep in my bones, I believe, the only way to address it is to lean into what I believe, which is that collaborative learning and work together is where the answer is, even though it feels counterintuitive when we feel like I'm depleted, I don't have enough, I can't. And so in the writing of that blog post, I thought about what are some of the windows I've found over these past couple of years where I was able to lean in and put something out on the table for a team or a teacher to engage with that was at the level that it was impacting kids. It was valuable, heavy coaching work, but it only took an hour. It was a smaller slice of time, a smaller investment for a teacher to say yes to that could generate some of that really positive learning and collaborative energy.
Yeah. And the coaching a la carte meal analogy, we'll get into it. But just that idea of bite size professional learning opportunities, some are less than an hour. And so it won't feel as depleting. And boy, will the give back feel just that bucket filling idea, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Morgan, your blog post around teacher teams, we've lived this with Sam's model around learning labs. Something you said in your blog post was we have to recast the roles of the adult as host to risk taker. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, it actually hadn't really occurred to me until I was already a weekend away from our first learning lab of the year. It's kind of our first post-pandemic learning lab. And the host who had agreed to have us come in and watch her writing workshop came into my office the Friday before and said, essentially, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know that anybody would see anything worthwhile. I don't know that it's a good use of our time. I don't know that I'm an expert at anything. She just said, I'm still figuring this out myself.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I looked at her and I said, and that's the risk you're taking.
Mm-hmm.
And I could immediately see, and she put words to it, her shoulders relaxed. She took a deep breath. She realized that she didn't have to be the expert at anything, or at least she didn't have to be the only expert in the room. And what she gave us in watching her was really just exactly what you named in the intro. She gave us this anchor experience. She gave us our own little mini lesson that then we could all apply in the various different ways. And by casting her in the role of risk taker, she realized that she was a learner among learners. It wasn't something that she needed to be an expert at. And while her colleagues did recognize while we were in the observation that she is expert at many things, what they walked away with wasn't about her. It was personal even to them. So everybody in the room was taking a risk at learning something that was really customized and personal. And I feel like the entire experience just normalized the nerves. It normalized the vulnerability and built trust among the team and sent them all back into their classrooms, better teachers for it.
Yeah. I want listeners to have a better understanding of what we're deeming a learning lab. Not everyone that listens is an instructional coach like we are. And I'm going to quote Morgan from your post, if it's okay with you. We call it a learning lab, which has been part of our school's professional learning framework since before COVID. It is one of the ways we ensure learning in our PLC, or professional learning community, goes beyond analysis of student work to study teacher work or instructional practices. And that is just what it is. We jump into a classroom with a lens of focus. But what I found fascinating when I was prepping for our conversation, the idea of a pre-planning or a pre-brief to set the tone for our work. And then that shifts to we're either teaching in the middle of a unit of study with children, or we're in the middle of a learning lab with adults studying and observing what we had set a focus around. And then there's that culmination of finishing strong or debriefing and committing to our next steps as learners. Both of your entries had that parallel structure of a pre, being in the work, and a post of some sort. So I thought it could be interesting to toggle our voices in conversation. Amy, I adore the idea of coaching a la carte, quick coaching opportunities or possibilities. What kinds of opportunities or planning before a unit can make us stronger together?
I think to me, the planning before a unit is all about clarity. And the more clear we can be as an individual teacher and as a member of a team, the more clear our students will be around what it is they're wanting to learn. And I think sometimes we don't invest enough time in getting really clear and into the nitty gritty and like, what does it actually look and sound like when a student has it? What will that work look like? And what level of depth and complexity are we actually talking about? And so some of the examples on the a la carte menu for the pre are sort of ways to complete a task that might need doing, but that also through the work of that task, that collaborative team or that teacher and coach are pushed into the detail and forced to talk about what that really means. And so, for example, something that's been part of my practice as a writing workshop teacher for years is I prep my conferring notes. Like, how am I going to set that up? And what am I going to be looking for when I'm conferring with writers? What are the content or process skills that I'm going to be gathering data on that I'm anticipating we'll be having conversations about and offering feedback and setting goals around? And in the process of setting up that very practical, I need this sheet because I'm going to take notes on it, whoever I'm doing this with collaboratively, we are calibrating and coming to some agreements around what are those most important things that we are teaching and gathering data around for this unit. And so for a team that maybe skimped a little bit on the unit planning because they were in a hurry or feeling overloaded, this task gives them an opportunity to really clarify around some of those what do we want kids to learn pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the power you mentioned as well is teacher as writer, that idea of living it, trying it. Can you say more about what it means to be a teacher as writer, even alongside unpacking mentor text too?
Absolutely. I'm often surprised at the number of teachers who haven't actually done the type of writing they're asking their students to do.
Yeah.
And I think building in a little bit of space to do that, especially together, really helps open up a teacher's eyes around what are the parts of this that might be hard for writers that I'm going to need to support in a specific way. What was hard for me? And so part of it is almost the street cred of like, you're also a writer in this work doing the same kind of writing you're asking your kids to do. And kids know when you are and when you aren't. That comes across when you talk with them.
Sure does.
But also it really helps, one, as a team clarify, because we might have named what it is we want kids to do, but until we actually do it and compare that, sometimes we didn't actually mean the same thing. So it helps us clarify. And it helps us anticipate what are the parts of the process or the skills that I'm going to teach differently because I've experienced it and now I have a better understanding of what those writers might need. In a similar way, that idea of unpacking a mentor text, when we're in a hurry, sometimes we might just say, oh, yeah, here's my touchstone text, here's the mentor text I'm going to use, and make assumptions that everybody around the table would use them the same way. Whereas when we take time to really open them up and sticky note and talk specifically about how we might use that text, which page, in what way, at what point in the unit, we can learn so much from each other around how to be skillful in our use of mentor texts in our mini lessons or in conferring with our writers. And it's just that opportunity. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it can really help a team become more clear when they have that mentor text on the table and they're talking about how they're going to use it.
Absolutely. And Morgan, I read your post today The child that said to you, "When do I get to be my own writer?" What were the child's words in your post?
She said, "When do I get to write like me?"
Yeah. Oh, Morgan, I read it this morning. I thought, oh, God, come on. And I think she was 10 at the
Yep.
time. Yeah. And I thought, as adults, when do I get to choose my own learning journey and not feel like it's being something pushed at me? And I feel like if we switch to the idea of a learning lab, the way you describe that experience, it's so tailored to the teacher's need, even though we're jumping into one classroom. Could you explain how the pre-brief of a learning lab, that initial phase, is critical to setting the classroom work up for success?
Yeah, I think it's very basic. The bones of the pre-brief are really to provide context for what we're about to observe, to give the host an opportunity to answer some clarifying questions. Like Amy was saying, it's about clarity. So, can the host give us a little bit of background about the kids in the room? Can they give us a little bit of background about what they're about to teach? Where are we in the unit of study? Where have we been? Where are we going? What are you trying out? To really name that risk. This is also a part that I realized I had neglected with this particular teacher I mentioned earlier, that this also gives us an opportunity to normalize that she's nervous about
Yeah,
things, right?
absolutely.
And to name that. So in this particular instance, this teacher was trying on an old practice with a new resource. She wasn't quite sure how it was going to work. She and I had worked on a rubric together last year, and now we're using a different curricular resource. And so she's trying to integrate those two things. What that does is it gives everybody else at the table an understanding of what kinds of things they're going to see during the observation so that they're not tempted to ask the question in the moment and they don't have this lingering question that's going to otherwise distract them from what they're seeing.
Yeah.
It also gives the host an opportunity to walk us through some of those checkpoints in the lesson so that we are able to tune into them as we watch them unfold. This is also a point where each observer can name the lens through which they're observing. This is where Sam likes to add in that research component sometimes here in the pre-brief, right? So that we know exactly what it is we're naming. In the learning lab that I did with this third grade team, I didn't have formal research. We were all new to this particular resource. So that became our third thing in the room. And then each person got to name what it is that they were struggling with. The same way the host said, "I'm still trying to figure things out." Each person named that. One teacher said, "She's still trying to figure out the timing." Another teacher said, "I'm still just trying to figure out how to like teaching writing. I don't like doing it. I want to see what it looks like in a classroom where the teacher loves it, the way that our host did." Everybody named something different, which also just, again, normalized the spirit of inquiry,
Yeah.
that we're all walking in to this process together and nobody has the answers. Those two parts, providing the context for the lesson and then naming the lens through which we're observing, are critical. Another one I'll add that I've had an opportunity to try in several instances since came to me from a CCIRA session this year, actually with Vicki Collette, through her lesson study framework, where she asks teachers during the pre-brief to anticipate student response.
Oh, I like that.
I'd never done it before, and I wasn't sure of its worth. But I did it with a team, and we essentially went through the teacher's lesson design, and alongside that, paralleled that with what would we expect students to do. So, for example, at this point in the lesson, we expect students to turn and talk. Plus, coaches, we have a ton of experience kid watching and watching kids' response to teacher moves. Teachers are gifted at that in the moment when they're the teacher, but in observation, I find that we need some practice at this. And so it helps us to name what we might notice. How do kids get into partnerships? How long do they talk? What are they talking about? How do they get back from that and return to the lesson itself? So it helps to hone our eyes for that level of observation. So that was another one that I've tried several times.
I also so appreciate the opportunity before we jump into a classroom to set norms or how we're going to live together in this space. And Amy, I feel like even if we're not jumping into a classroom, that idea of coaching moments with each other, there has to be a way we are going to live and breathe together as learners that's respectful, and we can disagree, yet we are all coming at it at a well-intentioned place. That idea is brilliant of anticipating. And I'll never forget planning around an interactive read aloud with a learning lab. And we were looking at student talk and what types of questions really get kids going with conversation. What we had not anticipated, but I wish we had, was if we ask a question that we hope students will do some inferential thinking, for example. We were planning on listening for all that rich inferential thinking. Yet, when we were listening, the students may have been predicting, or they may have just been summarizing black and white what's on the page. And so I think anticipating, if we're asking a question to get at this concept, what do we do if the students are not? So it's just fascinating. I'd love to shift our conversation to that in the moment. We're either in the middle of a unit of study, Amy, or we are in the thick of it in lab. So, Amy, how can we take that coaching a la carte to collaborate mid-unit of study?
So this is where we're teaching and we want to see our kids learning, right? So we're in the unit and we have lots of time to adjust and respond. And we want to make sure that we are gathering the information we need to gather and analyzing it and collaborating around what those next steps are. And so this is also where there are so many rich opportunities to learn from each other. There's always so much expertise in the room. And when we feel busy and rushed and like we don't have time, we don't share those things that help us all be better practitioners. And so each of these a la carte items is a place that invites groups to put something on the table that's going to help us look at student work and learn from each other and be really responsive.
Yeah, yeah. And I want listeners just to hear more about feedback palooza, please. What in the world do you mean by that?
I find, especially in writing workshop, feedback is an area that is universally understood to be super powerful and can be really overwhelming when you're feeling pressed for time. And I think one of the practices that has felt impactful for me as a coach in that situation, especially if I'm working with that PLC team and I have deep understanding of the unit, it's pretty easy for me to bop in and offer really specific feedback for writers based on what the teachers are looking for. So, for example, I was working with a fourth grade team and the kids were writing historical fiction, and they were really focused on how a writer's using dialogue and inner monologue to move the plot forward and also to show how characters are responding. And so they wanted all writers to get some really good feedback within like a 2-day period. And they felt like, wow, there are just two of us, we can't do this. I was able to push in and support with conferring in that period of time, both in classroom and also because kids were working in Google, I could offer outside of the classroom. I had a little bit extra time, so I could offer a lot more feedback, which supported the teachers. It was aligned with their goals, and the kids got the feedback they needed in that time frame to really be able to do something with it. And so that felt, as a coach, seeking opportunities to do things that matter for kids, it felt like such a good use of time based on the impact on learners.
Yeah. Amy, something that Chris Tavani and Sam Bennett have pushed me to think about is, are we asking our students to give us feedback about our practices? I think when we consider the term feedback, it's often us as adults offering feedback to our children. Yet, holy cow, when Sam asked me 2 weeks ago, what out of our time together worked really well for you as a learner, as an instructional coach, I was able to explicitly name for her. It was being tended to, and she allowed me to switch the task around a bit to meet my needs. And it was time. She gave us a lot of time to get messy and then conferred with us as learners. Morgan, it's also really hard in the middle of a learning lab because the protocol or norm we often said is grown-ups do not talk with children unless it's a certain structure. And we don't talk with each other either. That's why we're noting what we see and hear and tying it to research. So, can you share with learners, how does the observation grow teachers' learning within the team from being in that classroom in the middle of a learning lab?
Yeah, I do think it is important as part of that pre-brief we were talking about before to norm that behavior, that we really are going in to view this as a fishbowl, and anything that we do in the room adds a variable that wouldn't be there on any other given day. So it is important for us to norm that ahead of time. And as Amy was talking, I think of the amount of feedback that teachers get about their own practice by watching each other is like drinking from a fire hose. I had
It's so
a
true.
teacher out of this particular lab who just said it was a few minutes in and I just started feeling really bad about my practice. She's watching this teacher do her thing and create magic in the workshop, and she immediately started reflecting on her own. And yet she kept taking notes. So, a lot of times in the moment in an observation, we have to really just stay focused on data collection. But what we're learning to do in the process, or what teachers are learning to do in the process, is to become more reflective on their practice, is to become better kid watchers, to be able to name what it is that they're seeing in that way that they can then choose or not choose to do it in their own classrooms. I have teachers who say to me all the time, like, I just need to see it. Well, this forces them to name what it is that they're seeing. And even if they don't give it the name that we would call it or the name that's in the research, it gives them an opportunity to be descriptive about what it is they see their colleagues doing and the reaction that kids are having to that teacher move. In the end, I do feel like even teachers who might watch and start to feel out of their own depth a little bit in watching a colleague do something that they're skilled at, the reflection and the debrief becomes even that more critical, because we've got to name that in a way that shifts thinking and chooses just one thing. That doesn't always happen in the midst of the observation. So the observation really is that data collection. It's the feedback palooza, right? It's sometimes swimming with sharks, maybe, but it's just about flooding the space with all that we can so that the debrief that follows will be that much more rich and meaningful.
Morgan, I feel like it's a perfect segue for you to explain what the purpose and flow of the debrief is. Why is the debrief so critical to that idea of what happened during the observation and data collection?
I do think it is the opportunity for teachers to surface the things that are most important. I tend to take copious notes during observation, as most coaches do. Teachers usually come back into the room with a page or two of notes. And so the first step is to code them in some way. If we've been connecting to research, we might have named certain practices or look fors A, B, and C. We then go back into our notes and code them. Where did we see evidence of A, B, and C? In this particular case with the learning lab I've been talking about, it really was just an opportunity to say, code your notes for something you think is important that we talk about. So that immediately lifts us out of the flood. It whittles each person's noticings down to the 2 or 3 things that they think are the most critical. And it almost blurs the rest a little bit. I can see the forest for the trees at that point. And so I give everybody an opportunity to do that independently first. And then we collect them in sort of a whip around fashion. Everybody just gets a chance to go around the table and say what it is they noticed or want to share until we've exhausted those 2 or 3 most critical or important things. And at that point, it's really important that we stay neutral in those noticings. What did we see? What did we hear? Exactly the way that we took the notes. And I also look for those opportunities to segue us into those interpretations about what we saw or why it matters. This is also a point in the learning lab where we could, if we hadn't before, introduce some research so that we can better name what it is that we're seeing, or we can better name why it matters what we saw. So teachers are doing that interpretive work right now. For example, when in this third grade classroom, somebody noticed very neutrally that the mini lesson took 22 minutes.
Ah,
It included analysis of a piece of student work and a teacher model. When we shifted into the interpretation, we said, gosh, the teacher must really value modeling. That teacher as writer in front of students must really value that think aloud. At the same time, we could also infer that they didn't have a lot of time to practice that day because the mini lesson ran longer than it otherwise would have. Those were 2 still very neutral interpretations. They're fact-based, they're data-based, and it gave each of the people who did those noticings an opportunity to name what their next step would be.
ah,
So that part of why these practices matter or what inferences can we make about these practices then sets us up perfectly for those commitments that we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, sounds good. And Amy, I think that when I'm wrapping a unit of study, it feels like this race to the finish. Yet it's also where I always really wanted to linger with students because they've been working so hard on showing what they know and understand through reading, writing, talking. I adore the coaching a la carte options for finishing a unit strong. And I'd love for listeners to learn more about what your thoughts are.
I love what you just said about thinking about the learner at this point as well as the teacher, because it's so important for learners to have space to celebrate and reflect and notice what they worked really hard on during this unit and what they're able to do now to think about goals they achieved and sort of what a next goal might be. And I think that's also true for teachers. You think about how hard teachers are working, you know, and they want to know that hard work matters, that it's paying off in some way in student learning. And that's so affirming to be able to do that. And when we feel rushed and we don't make space for that, we're selling ourselves short. It's worth the time to reflect and recognize what worked really well and how we know. It's not just what we feel worked really well or what we liked or what we didn't, but based on student work, based on student outcomes, this strategy was super effective because this mentor text, I'm going to use that one again because this mini lesson that didn't have the impact that we expected it to on student learning. So we're going to try it a different way next year. And so thinking about those a la carte options, number one is that authentic audience. How are we celebrating with learners and with kids? How are we giving kids an opportunity to reflect what they achieved and how they feel about that and what's working for them as writers and learners and humans? The keep, drop, create is a routine from the world of PLC, where at the end of a unit, we take time and we look at our data and we look at our practices and we reflect on what worked, how do we know, and what will be changed for next time. Thinking about that rush to get to the next thing, what can we learn from this unit that's going to help us be more successful in our next unit? That is worth the time. And then the name is perhaps a little cutesy, but this idea of a doggy bag in terms of what student work are we collecting that might be an exemplar we can use next time. And this is one of those dual purpose coach moves where sometimes a team will pull their exemplars at the end and they'll realize then, oh, wow, we are not aligned. Our kids produced very different things in our classrooms, and now the unit is done. And it elevates for next unit. Let's get clear from the beginning. And now there's that sense of urgency to include a clarifying task in the before starting the next unit that maybe wasn't part of their practice, but now will be because they see an authentic reason for that. Created a little bit of an issue when we realized we weren't in alignment. And so sometimes these a la carte items play really well together in terms of doing one pushes on the value or the need to do another, which just is another window for collaborative work together.
Yeah. And there's nothing more brilliant than looking across modes of writing. So, when we're talking about a unit of study, usually it's focused around a particular mode of writing, whether it be narrative, opinion, argumentative based, or informational. But there are so many smaller genres that fall under those bigger umbrellas. And how cool is it to study with adults, yet also with children? What does a lead look and feel like across those modes of writing? If that was a strength of your writers, awesome. Then you can carry that in. If that was something kids were striving with, who cares? Let's carry it into next unit too. So that reflective piece is huge. And I cannot say enough about authentic audiences. That idea has to be provided to the children, and the adults have to think of it before the unit ever kicks off. So the children know who they are writing for. And the coolest thing Pernille Ripp planted a seed in my mind around was, why is this authentic audience or this person or this entity not offering feedback to the children throughout the unit of study? Come on. Can you imagine? And so that's something I'm specifically working on with some middle and high school teachers right now. They're writing letters, pretending that they're a character from a particular author's book. And he's offering feedback along the way to the students. Not every author will do that, but come on. And so I love the idea of pressing pause and reflecting it really sets the tone for how we move forward in our instruction, right? And Morgan, I want to read something you wrote. Your words are so eloquent. From the moment they, meaning the adult learners or the teachers, put this time on their calendar, called in their substitute teachers, and made space for this collective risk taking, this group of teachers was committed to learning from and for each other. So I need to know and better understand, does this idea of committing happen before the adults leave the learning lab or that debriefing session? When does that happen, Morgan?
Yes, and it does happen in the moment. I do ask that as closure, we name what's one thing you're thinking about that you'll carry into class tomorrow. What's one thing that you're walking away with? I think it does bring a nice closure to our time together. And people will name things based on how they showed up that day. So it could be, I'm going to hold sacred the time for my mini lesson independent practice. That means I've got to make sure that whatever came before it ends at 11:15 so that I have plenty of time for both. That can be the one thing. Another one from this particular third grade group came like, I need to be faking enthusiasm for teaching writing, even when I'm not feeling it, because it matters to kids how I enter into writing workshops. So it can be anything from that most tangible time commitment to this more abstract energy commitment. I do think it also helps to calm our nerves walking out of a learning lab. We've just seen so much. We could potentially apply so many different things in our classrooms. When we walk into rooms, we not only see what the teacher's doing, but we see the anchor charts around the room and all the things that we could possibly do that we're not currently doing. The one thing really helps to make it actionable. It also gives me something as coach to follow up on, very much the same way these end of unit things Amy was talking about give me my next entry point as coach. I also like to follow up the learning lab with a reflection that happens later. So I provide, in style of Sam Bennett, I provide a coaching note to every participant saying, essentially, thank you. Thank you for taking the risks. Thank you for building trust. Thank you for helping us with your keen eye for X. Might be your keen eye for time, your keen eye for energy. Whatever it was, I like to name a contribution that each teacher offered to the space and follow it up where I ask teachers to name what they noticed about themselves as learners, what part of the process worked well for them, kind of in that same line of thinking that Sam offered you in your coaching work, and then what adjustments might we consider for next time. So then feedback on the process for me as well. I like to do that after the fact, and even had a teacher comment on the idea that, nope, they wanted to reflect right in the moment, but after thinking about things a little bit and having an opportunity to go back into their classrooms where things get really real, really fast.
Yeah.
Having the opportunity to reflect on our conversation and our experience allowed them to be more authentic in what it was they could commit to in that space.
I want to go back to that drinking from a fire hose because that's how I've heard a lot of teachers describe being part of a learning lab. There's so much. And yet, let's go back to parallel practice because would we leave a student with 15 different next steps as a writer? Of course not, right? So, just as we want our students to feel like they have an actionable next step, and this goes far beyond writing. Conferring is conferring, right? But I think it's that same idea of we will be much more apt to try to take risks if we feel like our next step is chosen with us involved and not just told to us, but also that it's doable. And Amy, something you said, I'll quote your words. Educators are working hard every day to support writers, and it's important to respect their time while honoring their drive to continue growing as professionals. While I might argue that there is no replacement for the pure coaching cycle, each of these a la carte offerings has the richness and complexity necessary to fuel powerful collaboration between teachers and instructional coaches, the kind of collaboration that leads to a measurable impact on student learning. It's so beautiful. And, I think all three of our hearts do lie in that coaching cycle model because we've seen the effectiveness of it. But Amy, knowing that we're depleted, you've come up with these gorgeous suggestions to keep the learning going. What's our call to action moving forward in your mind?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah.
I have faith that educators are doing everything that they can, and that when offered opportunities to collaborate in ways that move learners, they're going to engage as they can. And I think the more we can design those opportunities so they can immediately see the impact, the more motivating that is, whether that's a collaborative opportunity with a coach or a team, whether that's a learning lab, like something where that teacher walks away and can see the impact on their learners and their practice, they're going to engage because everybody wants to grow. Teachers want to grow. And I think all educators deserve coaches and coaching. And to me, listening to the different threads of this conversation and how they're coming together, the phrase in my mind is that collective efficacy. And thinking about John Hattie's work and that most powerful influence on student learning is collective efficacy. And this is where it's built. It's built by doing big, deep, important work together where we really open the doors to our practice and get specific. And that's how we know and really have that confidence in our bones that we are moving kids together is through these kinds of practices.
Yeah. And the collective efficacy, I was just studying that research last week. And that idea of the shared vision, I press pause when I hear someone say, we want buy-in, because that actually doesn't sit well with me. And I think this is a shared vision. It's a shared commitment to just try, to grow together, to be messy in this work. And what a privilege has it been to work for school districts that welcome the messy goodness of our teaching and understand that if we are not able to take risks in a safe way, then why in the world would our students feel comfy doing that? Right. And Morgan, your quote is so beautiful as well. This work, whether time spent sharing firsthand experiences with students or spent preparing for or reflecting upon teaching and learning, reinforces the idea that all students are our students. All writers are our writers. We are stronger together. It's so beautiful. Morgan, if you had to leave listeners with a call to action, what would you say?
I think it goes back to something you actually just said. This is big work, but we have to just get started. And we can't let the getting started of something get in the way of the doing. So one of the things I love about the coaching a la carte from Amy is it breaks it down into these bite-sized pieces. And that makes it manageable. That sets us up for some really quick wins along the way because we can't bite off the entire vision, but we can break it down into some small parts. One thing I think that I had to overcome in setting up these learning labs was positioning myself as risk taker as well. I hadn't done learning labs with this staff before at this particular school. They had a vision of what it should look like based on pre-COVID experiences that they'd had. And we still didn't let that keep us from doing the work. And we modified it to meet the needs of each person in the room. So when I talk about learning labs, I don't use a capital L, because I don't want there to be any one way that we go about doing learning labs. I've done this in a modified version where any 45 minutes where we can do a pre-brief, an observation, and a debrief is worthy of a learning lab sort of structure.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a half day or a full day endeavor. It can really be a bite-sized moment in time that just allows teachers a glimpse into each other's practice. I do feel like any time that we can break something down into its smaller parts, we more quickly see what it is we have already accomplished and more easily see what our next steps are. And the ultimate goal is to bring out each other's strengths for the service of all students. It's the inverse, right? We want students to be able to look at the team and say, those are my teachers,
Yeah.
regardless of who's standing in front of them. All those teachers are my teachers in the same way that we look out at kids and say, they're all our students.
Yeah. And I have to say, I have followed the Two Writing Teachers blog since its inception. I think it was in 2007. I've looked forward to that post coming into my inbox every morning around 5 a.m. for a long, long time. And to see and experience your voices, your perspectives as co-authors has been nothing short of a gift. And for listeners to understand, it's no longer two writing teachers. It's evolved to quite a few co-authors that weave together a tapestry of backgrounds and beautiful roles from where you are all over. And I'm just so grateful for both of you lending your time and your voices. And this conversation to me was so cool how even though you had two separate blog entries, the threads really did weave together quite nicely. So you're amazing. Thank you for sharing your brilliance with listeners.
Thanks, Olivia.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been so much fun to talk with you.
Indeed. Take care, guys. Schoolutions is a podcast created, produced, and edited by me, Olivia Wall. Special thanks to my guests, Amy Ellerman and Morgan Davis. Thanks to my older son, Benjamin, who created the music that's playing in the background. If you like Schoolutions, please share, rate, review, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Schoolutions Podcast. If you want to reach out, the email is schoolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to talk about us nicely on social media, and please keep listening. Let's continue finding inspiration together.